Hi, I'm Charie Ginete-Ilon. This is Life Expressions. Together, let's explore stories that inspire, empower, and uplift. This is your space for real talk and meaningful journeys. Today's guest is Katrina Chen. She has 18 years of experience in politics, community services, and public engagements. Katrina has moved to Canada from Taiwan on her own and started her grassroots work in the community after her graduation from Simon Fraser University. She was elected to Burnaby's Board of Education in British Columbia at the age of 30. In 2017, Katrina was elected as the member of Legislative Assembly for Burnaby Lougheed and served as the Minister of State for Childcare. She successfully laid the foundation for a new social program committed to implementing a $10 a day childcare system for all BC families. Katrina also negotiated the first Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement with the federal government, bringing billions in new funding. She was the first Taiwanese-born Canadian appointed to BC Cabinet and the youngest member of the Executive Council at the time. In 2019, she was recognized as one of the top 10 outstanding young persons overseas in Taiwan. Katrina is currently president of Community Savings Credit Union, starting up the first Chinese-Canadian and Chinese language credit union initiative in BC. Her first children's book, A Stronger Home, raises awareness about family violence, and this is available on Orca Publishing. Katrina actively volunteers for various community causes and has always been a vocal advocate for childcare, public education, anti-racism, workers' rights, anti-gender-based violence, mental health, and equity. I'm so glad to have here on Life Expressions podcast, Katrina Chen. Hi, Katrina. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Katrina, what inspired you to share your story through a book called A Stronger Home?
Well, I've been really public with my experience as a survivor of gender-based violence, and whenever I looked back in my journey, I thought of how gender-based violence has really impacted my whole life. Many of the choices that I've made, unfortunately, I was first touched by gender-based violence at a very young age. I think it's so important for survivors to know that we're not alone in this journey, that we're here to support each other. It's important that we find safety and we are able to begin our healing journey. And at the same time, it's so important to raise more awareness about gender-based violence. As you have seen and maybe heard the statistics, that 1 out of every 3 women, and this is worldwide and also here in Canada, in pretty advanced countries like here in Canada, 1 out of 3 women have been experienced some sort of forms of violence, gender-based violence, and 1 out of about 30 to 40% women have experienced different ways of abuse or control or violence against women and people because of their gender and their identity. So I think it's so important to recognize that gender-based violence is the longest, the most pervasive and devastating human right violations throughout human history around the world. Yet there's so little awareness about this topic. There's still a lot of stigma for people to come out and share about their experience as survivors. So I think it's time, especially unfortunately what we're here in BC in Canada, that just during the past 3 weeks there were already 5 women who lost their lives because of gender-based violence and also family violence. And a lot of the violence that happens to be intimate partner relationships. So it's so important to no longer see them as individual cases. This is really a public safety concern, and it's important that we take urgent actions to prevent and also to support survivors who have been impacted by violence.
Yeah, that is so true. We appreciate women like you who speak up and really advocate for public safety and for women who are victims of gender-based violence. For yourself, was there a defining moment when you knew it was time to speak out?
I was touched by gender-based violence, like I said, at a very young age, but I never talked about it until it was a hidden secret that, I was young and I've thought about it. I thought about sharing. And I grew up in a really good family. My family and my parents are very supportive. And, sometimes people have stigma that gender-based violence only touches women who may be living in tough situations or lower income families. That is totally untrue. Gender-based violence touches women from all diverse backgrounds. But even with the support and the privileges that I had, unfortunately, I was touched by violence at a young age. And when I was touched by violence again later in my life, in my late 30s, I realized, why did I never talk about my childhood trauma? Why did I never have the courage to find safety, to find ways to heal? and how violence has really altered my life. And like I mentioned, a lot of decisions I made in my life. And it's so important that we speak up. And I remember there was a moment that I was at this event that was supporting Indigenous women who had been murdered because of gender based violence. And it was a pretty big gathering. And there was this Indigenous elder who said, there are so many women from all different backgrounds that have been touched by violence, but their trauma is hidden. They're not speaking out because our society has never provided a safe space for them to speak out. And that really hit me because I was like, you're talking about me. And that started getting me thinking, facing my own trauma, started to make the decisions in my life that to give me the space to be able to heal, to recover and think about my journey. And that really motivated me throughout this journey to think about why did the young Katrina never talked about it? And now I want to be able to, whether through my book or through my advocacy work, to support more women and girls who have been impacted by violence to have a space. If they want to speak out, that's great. But if they don't want to speak out, it's in their own time, but at least a safe space to heal.
Yes. Writing about personal trauma is never easy. How did you find the courage?
I'm pretty lucky that I had to use the word lucky because no survivors are lucky, but I'm pretty, blessed in many ways that I have a good support from my family, from my community. I have a lot of good friends. I immigrated to Canada on my own, but I always say that I have a lot of chosen families, sisters, friends, and people who have been there for me, trusted me, gave me the courage to walk through this very difficult journey. The healing journey could be really challenging, especially for survivors. There's many women that has to go through family court, criminal court, goes through tons of systemic barriers to be able to fight for their justice. And in many cases, sometimes they don't even get their justice. So it's so important that during my journey that I realized how important it is to have the community awareness, to have community support. And I am blessed that I have that support in my life. My parents, my family have given me a really strong foundation. I had good education. I had a stable job to be able to help me to recover. But not many women have that. And that is why there's so much more we have to do together to support women with diverse situations to be able to heal and also to prevent violence. I think it's so important that we break the generation of cycle of violence. Sometimes people, the abusers, are hurt people themselves. They may have experienced violence in their childhood, may have seen family violence when they're at a young age, and they don't understand what is, how to maintain a normal relationship, a healthy relationship. And that's when sometimes violence gets passed on from generation to generation. So it's important to educate our kids. And that's why I decided to write a children's book, starting from a young age, starting from early learning to be able to break that cycle of violence.
Your book, A Stronger Home, as we have mentioned, tackles domestic violence, but with such honesty. What do you hope readers would take away from this?
I really hope to create more understanding. A lot of people have asked me during past interviews about, what do you think people should do? I said the first thing to do is to have the awareness, to trust survivors. We need to have a public awareness about gender-based violence. I often use the example as anti-racism. In Canada, if you talked about anti-racism maybe 20, 30 years ago, many people are like, no, Canada is great. We're so diverse. We love each other. There's no racism, right? But in the past 10, 15 years, people have had more awareness about racism. Of course, racism still exists, especially systemic racism. There's still a lot of bias, stereotypes, misunderstandings, and also inequities exist based on race. That being said, there has been much more awareness about racism, that it's a topic that people are talking about. We're educating our kids in schools, and we understand, most people hopefully understand racism is wrong and there's systemic barriers. That being said, if you look at 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. So gender-based violence should get the same attention, especially we mentioned about how 1 in 3 women have been touched by gender-based violence, how just in 3 weeks, 5 women in BC have been killed. Those are very significant statistics that should also encourage and push our whole society, our whole government to have that awareness to fight against gender-based violence, collective actions, collective education, starting from our schools, from our community, from our workplaces, to make sure we treat this as a top urgent situation that we have to fix.
Yes, I totally agree with that. How does your experience challenge common misconceptions about domestic violence?
There's so many, we've probably watched movies about how survivors are being questioned in in courts, right? In the justice system. You've seen probably movies about girls being questioned about, oh, why are you out late at night, right? Victims who have been violently attacked, or, what were you wearing? You know, judging their character. You see that in movies, but it does
Yes.
exist in our current court system, that the defense lawyer tend to attack the victims, to tend to try to change their character, right, to be able to support their defendant. And there's also a lot of misconceptions about family violence. I remember years ago, there was a BC politician who was actually in a very significant leadership position, and he described domestic violence as tough marriages. And I was really angry. Many women like me at the time, I remember when we heard that. And he did apologize. He apologized for his poor choice of words, but that is very common, that people don't see family violence as a public safety issue. When a violent act happened in the public, people tend to get a lot of media attention. Everybody's like scared, and people talk about it. But when violent acts happen at home, which is actually where violence tend to happen more, is in
Yes.
private spaces, people don't pay attention. And that is so important that we start paying attention to violence happening in private homes and spaces, especially to the more vulnerable women, children, individuals who are marginalized. So I think it's so important that we continue to talk about it and to prevent it from happening in all spaces.
If someone is now experiencing domestic violence and has not spoken up, what would you like to say to them?
You're not alone. I think it's so important to know that none of us is alone in this journey. Yes, we may have different unique situations, and I also personally understand how long it could take for survivors to get out of a very unsafe situation. Sometimes when you lived constantly or have experienced violent situations, it is mental health. You need time to recover. You need time to think clearly, right? You need support, and you need to see your situation clearly. Now I look back, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I struggled for so long. But when I was struggling, it's really hard to see that there is the end of the tunnel, there is hope. And for someone like me who have really experienced mental health challenges because of unacceptable behaviors, that violence that has happened against us, that sometimes it does take time to heal. So I would say that it's so important to know that there is always help. There's always women and individuals like us that are working together to raise more awareness, to support each other. And I often say that courage is not about acting strong, right? It's not about pretending that we're okay. Courage is about facing the systemic inequities, facing the challenges that we have in our lives, in our society, and being able to fix it.
Let's talk about your political journey and advocacy. As a former MLA, how did your personal experience shape your policies or priorities?
Always say that it's so important to have more people with diverse lived experiences in electoral politics. Currently in Canada, even though we're a very multicultural, very diverse community, we still do not have a fair representation of people with diverse lived experiences making important policy decisions. If you look into government, there's a lot of privilege, there's lack of representations from different backgrounds. And I'm not just talking about or a different race or an ethnicity. I'm also talking about socioeconomic backgrounds, that people who have different lived experiences have experienced poverty, struggles, mental health challenges, trauma. And I don't think that's has been well represented. I always say politics is still, unfortunately, a very privileged place to be. You don't see a lot of young people being represented in politics as well, whereas our young people in our future are so important. So I think people who has lived experiences, for example, myself, even though I have definitely recognized a lot of the privileges that I have in my life, but as, for example, a survivor who has struggled with trauma, mental health, and gender-based violence, as a mother who has struggled with childcare, it does help me when I'm working on policies. Like when I was implementing the universal childcare plan, the $10 a day childcare that has never existed right here in BC when we were first elected in 2017 and the government decided to put childcare as a top priority. That it was my lived experiences, and it was the lived experiences of many women and moms and parents who have come together to share our lived experiences to be able to find solutions to fix the challenges. So I think on every issue that we're facing right now, whether it's from public safety, lack of investment in social policies, trauma, mental health, healthcare system, I think it's so important to have politicians with those lived experiences to be able to fix the challenges and to be able to represent the demographic and the constituents and the people who are impacted by the policies.
What was the most difficult part of balancing public service and personal healing?
I think for survivors, and I've had other colleagues who have been impacted by gender-based violence or other forms of trauma. Sometimes for people like us, when we're healing, we crave for authenticity. We're really craving for honesty because we want to be able to face our trauma honestly, and we want to be able to recover together and to be honest about the situation. That being said, as we know in politics, there's a lot of performances. It's also a very performative space that you have to always act a certain way. Like I sometimes think about different waves of feminism. The first wave of feminism, all the women had tried to act like men. They have to perform in a certain way to show tough, cut their short, cut their hair short. And I was one of the girls who always wanted to be a tomboy. I wanted to act strong. I wanted to show that I'm stronger. I'm like a man. But then later on in my life, I realized true equity is not about copying other people or pretending that we're strong. True equity is really being ourselves. And in the political space, unfortunately, there's still a lot of expectations of how politicians should look or perform in a certain way. You have to act really strong. You have to be like a tough person. You have to be like a man, right? And for a lot of women of color, and when I was elected, I was the youngest in cabinet. I was fairly young in politics. That there's definitely a lot of systemic barriers and stigmas and challenges for people with diverse representations, diverse lived experiences to be in politics, and there continues to still have a lot of those challenges. So I think, unfortunately, politics is a hard space to be truly be authentic, to be yourself. And I would say that's probably one of my biggest challenges because, as you can tell, I'm pretty frank about my stories. I want to be open about my experiences, but sometimes in politics, it's really hard to balance that.
But we truly appreciate your authenticity. And I must say, you've reached a lot of breakthroughs, especially about childcare. The $10 a day childcare for BC families is now gaining grounds. You're a strong advocate for that. What would you say about this now?
We still have a lot of work to do to be able to fulfill our commitment. When the NDP government in BC first got elected in 2017, at the time, John Horgan and the finance minister, Earl James at the time, made a big commitment to build a new childcare system for all BC families that's equitable, accessible, affordable, and high quality. It was a 10-year plan that has already been pushed by Coalition of Childcare Advocates, many women, mothers, and parents who have pushed for what we call the $10 a day plan. It's an equitable universal access childcare plan for all families. We definitely have made a lot of progress in the first, especially the first 3 years. I was able to secure an over 1 billion budget,
Wow.
which was
Yes.
really significant for the first 3 years. And then we were also very blessed that even despite COVID, the federal government at the time recognize the importance of childcare. And even despite really difficult financial difficulties during COVID, they came along and invested. Now that the federal government investment has surpassed the BC government investment to really significant support that budget to build a new system. So it was a really great time that the federal and the provincial government came together to build the 10-year plan to commit to $10 a day childcare. We've made a lot of progress with fee reductions, lots of families benefiting from 10 a day, but it's still not fully accessible at this moment. We have not finished our 10 a day plan. And actually, just a few weeks ago, the Coalition of Childcare Advocates, and I'm now part of the member. After I left politics, I decided to join the advocate to continue to push for childcare. We have just relaunched our campaign to push the provincial government to step up and to do more because there has been significant delay of the plan during the past 3 years of childcare investment. And even when I was MLA, and when I even the kind of the last bit of my time as minister, I was the minister responsible for 5 years. Even at the end, I was feeling that childcare was no longer a priority for the government at the time. And I understand there's a lot of competing priorities, right? There's now tariffs and there's always this world economic crisis. But I think that when there is a will, there is a way to finish this plan. Families need it. And economically, there has been significant economic results that has been showing how parents, when they have access to childcare, They can return to work, they can have full-time work, they can have stable income because of the support of childcare, especially for women. This is also a gender equity
Yes.
issue. So the government are seeing result. Every dollar we invest in, we get minimum $2, $3 back in just a few years. And if we look at Canada-wide studies, that in Quebec, every dollar you invest in childcare, you get $5 to $6 economic results. I hope the government will continue to invest, and I will definitely work with all the parents and advocates to continue to push the government to finish the 10-year plan that we committed in 2017.
You're apparently doing a lot for the community and you're very
Thank you.
passionate for this advocacy for childcare and, of course, equity. Now, let's get personal. You've talked about your mental health issues and how you rose about it and spoke up and encouraged women to speak up as well. For you, what does healing look like today?
I think healing is, in summary, I would say, is to do our best to live our most authentic selves. I always say that the best way to fight systemic inequities is to be true, is to live the way we want to be. We want to be authentic to the lifestyles, the culture, the person who we are, and to recognize that with the colonial patriarchal influences and hundreds of years of systemic inequities, capitalism that has imposed
Yes.
on human beings. It's a hard journey. It took me a long time to understand, to figure out who I am, what I want in my life. I've always appeared to be a really strong, I'm a fighter throughout my life. And, I had the courage to get into politics to hopefully fight for better changes. And it was only in my late 30s I realized that my whole life has been reacting to what the society, what has life thrown at me, instead of being truly recognizing who I am and what I want to live my true authentic self. It could be a long journey, and healing could take time. I'm still healing. Healing may never end, but I think it's so important to recognize that there are a lot of inequities. There is a lot of brokenness in this world. Like as we're speaking right now, there are children dying every minute
Yeah.
in this whole world. There's a lot of systemic issues and challenges, and I think it's important that the whole world needs to heal. We need to recognize those challenges, be kind to each other, to face the trauma that we have so we can heal and prevent trauma from passing on from generations to generations. Personally, I have experiences how trauma impacted me, that I could become a person who could spread my anger and my hate and my sadness to other people. And it's so important to heal so we can prevent that from spreading.
Yeah, it's really important to heal and acknowledge the time that you need in healing, right? Let's talk about resilience. How do you define resilience after what you've been through, healing and helping others heal as well?
As I mentioned, resilience, courage, strength is never about pretending to be strong. It's never to convince ourselves to act strong. It's to face our true authentic selves, to face the challenges that we have, to deal with it, to support, to recover from those challenges, and also to prevent those challenges from passing on from generations to generations. And I'm still learning. It is a difficult journey. There are times I could still feel sad or feel angry or feel triggered, could still be reactive to the things that have happened to me or in my life or the situations I'm in. That being said, it's so important to recognize it, to recognize our challenges, to know that we're not perfect. Nobody is perfect. We all have
Yes.
flaws. We all have our own challenges, and it's okay that the world is not perfect. And sometimes when I think about my political journey, I think that's hopefully what the government should do more, is to recognize that, yeah, we're not perfect and there's so much to fix. We don't always have to pretend that everything is all right. We don't always have to pretend that, oh, we're doing the best we can. No, it's okay to work with people together as government, as communities, as individuals to recognize the challenges that we have so we're able to make our society better for everybody.
Women like me continue to learn from you and get inspired by you and what you do. If you could go back and speak to your younger self, what would you say?
Well, I learned from many, many women in my life as well, including you, and from my mom, from my sisters, from my friends. I would say that it's okay to share. We're safe and we're here to support each other, and that I was never alone. When I was writing the story, I often think back about the little young Katrina. Why did she never told her story? Why was this such a challenge for her to be able to face her trauma and heal. It's okay to know that we're not alone, we're in this together, and there's always support and help.
What's next for you in this journey and service?
Well, I think there's still a lot of work to do to fully build the childcare system, right? To support all parents and women and mothers who are struggling with childcare, to support our community. And I think there's still definitely lots more to do to fight against gender-based violence, to end this longest devastating human right violation in human history. I would love to continue to work with many incredible women like you and those in our community to be able to support each other. And I know there's a lot of men and people as well, right? Not just women, not just women and girls. There's a lot of people in our society who understand the importance of this issue. And I think as we're very busy with our daily life, sometimes it's hard to put in a little bit of time for advocacy. But together, all of us to think about the whole community, all of us just putting 5-10 minutes a day to share, to learn, to take some little actions to support others in our community, our world would be a much, much better place for everyone.
That's wonderful. Katrina, how can our listeners support the causes you so deeply care about?
Well, I think you're already supporting by listening into this podcast, and thank you so much for continuing to spread important stories, and thank you for supporting my story. You're already supporting, and of course, I would encourage everyone to learn more about gender-based violence and the impact of violence. Share the stories, share with your children, share with your families, and of course, if you're willing and able to, definitely would welcome you to purchase a copy of my book. I donate all my personal proceeds to charitable causes to support women and children. So it's important that we do a little bit of things together in our own capacity to support each other. So thank you so much already for having me.
Thank you so much, Katrina. And I look forward to collaborating with you and working with you. I know that you are really authentic in helping the issue of women and having equality and safety for women and children. If you like this episode, please feel free to share this episode with your friends. Subscribe to Life Expressions Podcast so you won't miss any episode that would inspire you and help you grow and continue your journey of making a positive difference, just like Katrina Chen. Thank you once again, Katrina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's continue to make a positive impact wherever we are, however we can, in all that we do. This is Life Expressions.